last 4 sessions that we've had, which has been spread out over about a month and a half, dug into the topic of feasibility inspection and transactions and anything that has to be investigated. Okay. And what we came up with is before PSA, there's Form 35P, 22F, and 35W. These are pre-inspections, things for protecting someone before they make an offer to be able to have a pre-inspection with the seller and the conditions for that. And we went through that. And then there's the inspection waiver form, and we went through that. So those are the things that the topics 1, 2, and 3 that we did first. Then we looked at things that were purchase and sale agreement and mutual contracts. What section 21 is the big one for purchase and sale agreement. Item V and W that we went over, that's in the purchase and sale agreement. We went through inspection response. Those two I'm going to touch on. There's a final wrap up next week. There's a couple of things that I'd like to emphasize out of those 2 forms specifically. 35C, notice of seller consent inspection report, and then neighborhood review. Now, then there was another group of inspections that were for both residential and for land. 35S is feasibility, and we also looked at the notice form 90P for that. 22LA land, which is 4 pages long. It's an extensive addendum. We went through that. And so that's where we left off last week. So for today, there's a bunch of, well, I would say, I'd just say smaller forms to go through to wrap up all 14 topics. And that's the well addendum, the septic addendum, the title addendum, and the survey contingency. Now, title addendum, when I get to that one, I'm going to kind of skip over the analysis of title reports as a separate subject. Because for people that have never really spent a lot of time on title reports, sometimes they can be confusing. So I want to just spend a different focus on where you can go, how you can investigate AFN numbers, which are the auditor file numbers, and what to look for in a title report. So for today, those are the ones that I want to review and go through and wrap up all 14 topics. Now, out of that, for the well addendum, as I have done on others, I've made these matrix for kind of trying to summarize the form so you can go through them very quickly. If you haven't worked with a form recently and you'd like to get up quick on what's in it, this is a good way to look at it real fast. So in Form 22R, which is our well addendum, and 90X, which is your notice, this addendum supersedes any other addendum. The reason I put that right off at the bat is because in 22LA, there are things that you can do for inspection of water quality, water quantity, the well systems. And if anybody puts a 22LA into a purchase and sale agreement package and also includes a 22R, you have a chance of having confusion and conflicting directions to whoever's reading the contract. Well, right in Form 22R, it plain states this supersedes any other reference to water in this contract. So it just voids out 22LA. This will have anything that's in a purchase and sale agreement. The form asks for how many connections, whether there's more than one party that's hooked into this well and using it. If that's the case, there needs to be a shared well agreement. There's seller representations in this form. When the seller signs this addendum, they're saying that to the best of their knowledge, the following 4 things: the water supply is adequate, water is not contaminated by biological or chemicals, the water well meets applicable codes, regulations, purification standards, and that there's no material defects in the water system itself, other than normal maintenance. In other words, there's not something that's busted pipe or something that's broken. Again, on this form, I always reference where you can find it exactly in the contract if you want to read it quickly. As far as well documents, the seller's required out of this within a certain specified number of days mutually agreed to provide all the information they have on that well so the buyer can review it. That then gives a review period of agreed to number of days. The buyer gets to review that information. And during that review period, he has the ability to disapprove. If he does, that's where he uses Form 90X. And if that's the case, he gets to have a refund on the earnest money. So I put in here not all 90X, but always put in a Form 50 release of retainage. And the reason we don't use a Form 51 rescission is because 90X terminates the contract's already dead, so you don't want to terminate a contract twice. Once is enough. So Form 50 is the right form for the release of retainage. So well inspection contingency is item 4 in this form. And out of that, the buyer has the right to attend any inspections that are done on the well. And to make that clear, the test may include flow rate, purity standards, volume, adequacy, federal, state, local standards. All those things are up for being to the satisfaction of the buyer that they're being met. The buyer's duties is the buyer is responsible for the ordering and scheduling of all inspections. The testing is performed by a qualified inspector. It's not just Joe, my friend. You have to have somebody that's licensed in water, like a well driller, water systems. Also, all inspections are paid by the buyer, and the buyer may terminate with inspection notice, giving notice within that time period. Again, it's a 90X and a 50, and that's called out right there in that area of the contract. There's a warning in the form for local requirements. There's some things in different counties or municipalities that change the rules just for their local area. So it advises the buyer to be aware of that. That's why you want to have a inspector that's local, not somebody from the other side of the mountain, somebody that knows this county and knows this community. So to make sure you find those things. And then there's a space for other in case there's something else that the buyer would like to make sure they have a chance to investigate. So out of that form, for today, if I can get this over to where I want to go. There we go. So what we did is this matrix was pulled from this form. You'll notice on the form right here, this addendum supersedes. This is that very first statement that I had in the matrix. And these highlighted areas are where I pulled the information from that are in the matrix. So when I hand out the minutes, I'm going to make sure I include that form. And also I'll include the form for the instructions. This is where I was pulling information from for explaining how to use this form. So that's a pretty much an overview on the well addendum. The other one I want, which is kind of similar in layout, is 22S in septic. The same disclaimer is given in this form that was given in the well addendum. We'll pull that up real quick just to reference to it. Very first thing in the form, this is form, where is it, 22S septic. Whoops. Has the same disclaimer. Again, I have the same comment because 22 LA talks about all kinds of things on the OSS as far as what they can put in that form. You would think they're conflicting, but this avoids any conflict of that form or anything else. That people check boxes on it, this void. So with that, you want to know whether this is a private or shared septic system. There are many drain fields that are built for so many bedrooms in a community. We've seen that in some developments. Find that out around Manson. If you go out there on Summit Road, there's an area in there that has like 15 homes on that one major drain field that's been reserved out there. So if that's something that has to be identified, seller's representation to the best of seller's knowledge, just like the well, that they are saying that there's not requiring any repair other than pumping or normal maintenance. That is not currently in violation. I don't think I spelled that correctly, but I'll catch it, for applicable codes and regulations, and there's no material defects. The other thing is the maintenance records, just like with the well, those are to be turned over with a mutually agreed to number of days for the review of the buyer. And also that the seller shall comply with all local regular ordinances. Again, just like with water, there's some local codes in counties and municipalities that want to make sure that whoever's doing the OSS inspection is verifying that these have all been complied with. And when it comes to the inspection, one of the things that's different here is that the seller is responsible for payment. And the way the contract is written, as if the OSS needs to be pumped and paid for, the seller is up for doing that. However, there's a place in the form when you fill it out, there's just so many days you're saying that if the seller has had the inspection and pumping within 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever's filled in this blank, then they don't have to do it again. And so if, as a listing broker, if you're listing it and know that this has been performed and you think about how long it's going to take to sell the property, you might want to change how many days are on this so you don't have to have your seller go out and do it over again, as long as it's not like 5 years or 10 years or something. And as on the buyer side, if you see that form, if the seller wants to have that in, it's something you want to pay attention to, that they don't put like 4 years or 3 years in there. So once that is done, there's a provision in here that the box can be checked, that the buyer has the right to be in the inspections when they're performed, which is a buyer broker. I always want to make sure that's checked. I want my buyer to be present if there's going to be a pumping or an inspection. And the only other thing in there is a provision that if there's something from a lender that's requiring, let's say as you say it's 18 months, you don't have to redo it. And the lender says, no, if it's in 12 months, they have to do it. That would control, and no matter what's in there, they would have to do that anyway, because of that lender provision. The optional box, checking this box, gives the buyer the right to attend the inspections scheduled. And by the way, the seller has to give a minimum of 3 days notice. They can't say, oh, they're going to come today. The buyer has the right to have 3 days notice. And that's in this section right here of the contract. So the OSS inspection contingency, this agreement is conditioned on the subject satisfaction. Subjective satisfaction gives a lot of leeway to the buyer. They don't have to have any specific reason and point it out to justify terminating the contract if they don't like what they see in that inspection report. They have so many days to review it. As long as it's within that time frame, they have the right to give notice of termination with the Form 90Y and then a Form 50 for release of retainage. So that is your overview of the septic addendum. Now, both the water well and the septic addendum are pretty straightforward. They're very similar in what rights the buyers have and what rights the seller have for being able to review anything that has to do with documentation, maintenance, and operation and inspection. The other form that has to do that with during our mutual closing time frame is the title report and the title contingency. Now, in the title contingency, the agreement is subject to the buyer's review of preliminary commitment, the title insurance, and CC&Rs for the review period. And there's a certain number of days in the review period. Now, there's the boxes to be checked in there. If the box is checked for date after receipt of the report, and it's 5 days, if that's what's in there, then once you have documentation of transmitting it to the buyer, you start your 5-day count. If this box is checked, it's after mutual acceptance, and depending on the title company, you don't know if they'll get it done in 5 days or not, or whatever those days are. So you have to be careful on which box is checked and how many days are in there. There's another note. A lot of listing brokers put preliminary title reports in associated documents. If it is documented that it's delivered to the buyer before mutual, then this addendum states that that'll start upon mutual, the days start counting no matter what box is checked. And so that's something where as a buyer broker working with your buyer, you want to be very, I just want to know that if you're using this addendum and want it to start after they receive the title report, I've seen title reports change because sometimes the listing broker gets the title report and the listing might be 6 months old. And then by the time you get mutual, there may be some changes on that title report. There could be liens that have been against it. And so if you're reviewing an old report, you just gave away something that you would want to have your buyer pay attention to. So it's something just to be real careful about what you decide just to automatically start giving to your buyer, because there are certain rights that when you do that, you may be giving away And you might want to protect them that they get the most recent current preliminary title report and give them a full 5 days to review it. So let's just try to draw that to your attention. That's what's going on with here, and you want to make sure that you do the right thing for your buyer. So when the review period expires automatically, you don't need to have any kind of notice. If the time runs out, it runs out, and then the buyer loses any rights to terminate based on the title report. Now, you may give right for disapproval during the period. If you do that, that's a Form 90T title contingent notice. Now, the seller then has so many days to respond. This is different. If they disapprove, they have to say what sections in the title report they're disapproving they have a problem with. The seller has a right to respond within a certain number of days. And in that response, the seller has up until closing to be able to fix it. So the seller will respond on the Form 90T that the seller will either clear the issue, which means they have up until the day of closing to correct it, or the seller will not clear the issue, which then gives the buyer the option of saying they want to go forward or they want to terminate. Now, the interesting thing with this is that if the seller does not respond to the buyer within the line 11 time period, the buyer may terminate the agreement within 3 days of this notice. So they have a time clock on it. If they wait till day 4, they have to go forward and close. Now, if the buyer does not timely terminate within 3 days, the contingency is deemed waived. The buyer notice to terminate is 90T with the Form 50. There's an item 2 in the form, supplemental title reports. If a supplemental title report is issued during the period from mutual to closing, the seller's correction through the buyer's notice may produce a supplemental report. So if the seller agrees to make the change for the buyer, and that change is made, and then that supplemental report is issued, then this kicks in, and the closing date shall, well, first off, it restarts in the time clock. And if the time clock goes past closing, the provision of the title report is that the closing date shall be extended as necessary to accommodate the time needs for notices for the buyer. So there's a lot of, really, this title report has a lot of things going on in it that we need to be aware of and to protect our buyer. And so if there's 2 or 3 things that are in that title report that bother the buyer, there might be 1, 2, or might be 3 supplemental title reports issued, which will impact the closing date potentially. So it's something to pay attention to after mutual, and you write down what dates you need to track for your buyer. These are important dates to put on your list. Another thing that is in here is the very last, very short little line that says marketable title. It says the seller is obligated to provide marketable title to the buyer at closing. Dug into marketable title. It is addressed, and I'm going to bring this up in this matrix. I'm also going to attach the minutes, what I found, not only here, but also in other definitions from the RCWs on marketable title. Because on Form 21, page 2, item D, condition of title on line 47, title to the property shall be marketable at closing. This is stated right in the purchase and sale agreement, and it's reemphasized here on the title form. Also, in item D on line 51 and 52, monetary encumbrances or liens not assumed by the buyer shall be paid or discharged by the seller on or before closing. So what they're saying for marketable title is anything that is liened or any encumbrances against that property have to be removed by that seller before closing. And then item D states the title shall be conveyed by a statutory warranty deed. This is defined in RCW about what a statutory warranty deed is. I'm going to supply that with the minutes also. so that you understand what the definition of that is. The definition by RCW is warranty deed. It is also known as a statutory warranty deed. It's if those terms are interchangeable. Another thing is in the title insurance line for purchase and sale agreement, line 64, title company shall send a copy of the preliminary commitment to the seller, to the listing broker, to the buyer, and to the buyer broker. And I always make sure that I transmit the same day to my buyer so I can document it that I've presented it to them. But the title company is responsible to send it to, by contract, those 4 parties. And vacant land purchase and sale agreement, because I've been referring everything here to a residential, they have exactly the same provisions. It's just instead of item D and item E in a land agreement, it's item C and item D, but you'll find the same language. And so I'm going to take a second because I want to pull up. A marketable title, the legal dictionary, is a title to real property which has no encumbrances, mortgages, deeds, trust, lien, claim, and which is free of any reasonable objection, including minor mistakes in the description of the topographical errors. A court will enforce and contract and sell real estate if there's any marketable title. I found some definitions that it listed some specific things in greater detail than this. But what happened in our purchase and sale agreement for residential and for land is they specifically identify things that are okay for marketable title, and that they go back into things that are described if they're CC&Rs. In other words, if it's free of encumbrances, well, CC&Rs could be an encumbrance, but because it's specifically excluded in the purchase and sale agreement, there's a whole area there that I think is worth everybody reading, because then you can see how they really clearly define marketable title coming down to encumbrances that have to do with money, liens, and use of the property. When I say use of the property, it's anything that would prevent you from being able to take possession of it and build on it. Another area that I'm going to include in the minutes is this is what is Washington State statutory warranty deed. The Washington statutory warranty deed form, sometimes called a general warranty deed or simply a warranty deed, transfers Washington real estate from the current owner grantor to the new owner grantee with full warranty of title. Washington statutory warranty deed form is a statutory in that the warranty includes in the deeds are specifically defined by statute under RCW 640403. And so what I'm going to do with the minutes, rather than sitting here reading all that, I'm going to include that when I send stuff out so that you have that. Because when I group these emails together with this, it allows you to download into a folder. So for quick reference, you come back, everything should all be right there for this form and everything that's referenced in it, and also the definitions of marketable title and also for warranty deed. So anyhow, that it's really with that for a little one-page form. There's a lot going on with that title and the title review. I'd like to go back into how we have resources online for us to help our buyers when they have that 5-day period, look up things that they would like to research. We can spend some time doing that. A lot of the title reports have hot links, but if they get copied, those hot links go dead. It's not a problem. There's an easy way to find that information. And that's where we can help our buyers. The 90S, as sellers notice that the title commitment is available, is a pretty interesting form that I have never really paid attention to before. And so there's 2 notice forms under title. One of them is 90S, seller's notice that title commitment is available. I've never seen anybody use this form. What it does is the sellers notice that the title commitment is available, and it comes along and it says this has to do with Form 22T, and that it's either attached or it's available at the office of the listing agent, or it's available, maybe it's available at the office of the title insurance designated with some order number filled in on it. But should the seller listing broker issue this form, it's documenting the date and it's attaching it. The following is part of the purchase and sale agreement. So it becomes part of the PSA, as part of the contract. It goes to the lenders. It is something that starts the time period as soon as those dates are on there that it was delivered, which starts the 5-day counting on review by the buyer. But I found it interesting that as I was digging around, that I found a form that I've never really knew was there. The other notice form, since we're looking at all the notice forms, I want to make sure I look at this one. If the buyer ends up not liking what's in that title report, this is the form that the buyer gives notice of disapproval of title exception. And this is where they have to call out what that exception is. And then again, as I went through that matrix, this is where I referred to the seller response to the notice of disapproval title report. Gives notice that the seller will or will not clear the disapproved exception set forth in the preliminary title report. If they sign that, they now have until closing date to fulfill that. The buyer then has a chance to give notice. The seller has not timely delivered notice that the seller will clear the disapproved exceptions set forth in the preliminary commitment of title insurance. Buyer hereby elects to terminate the agreement. But this is the only way that the buyer has a way of terminating based on a title report. And I have never seen this form used either, because I've never seen anybody want to kick out of a mutual contract because of the title review. But
and that's a 90T.
This is Form 90T, title contingency notice. And this is one of the few notices that when the notice of disapproval is given, that disapproval doesn't create termination.
And not only that, we have to say what it is that
they have to disclose what it is in there that is something that needs to be fixed or addressed by the seller.
Could that be something like removing an easement that's no longer there or necessary?
Sure. There could be an easement that was given by great grandpa back in 1912 that you want to get rid of it. There's, somebody has rights to get on the property that's expired a long time ago and you just want to get rid of it, clean it up. So, but anyhow, that was title.
So our part as a broker then, if somebody has issue with anything within the title report, our advice is first go to the title company and then possibly an attorney.
Well, the title company have their own attorneys.
I understand.
So when you do that, if they feel a need for that's something they'd ask. They're kind of they're together. They're a team.
Okay.
The title report are the experts. As real estate brokers, we're not the experts. So right. We can lead them to the documents. We can lead them to things we think they should read. And if they want further clarification on that, then we should really have them talk to that title officer, because he's the expert, he or she. Okay. Another one that's interesting that I haven't seen used very often, but is here. Again, we have to look out for Form 22LA. It addresses survey. We don't want to double up on it. There isn't a disclaimer in this form like the other one. And this form only states right out of the chute that it's contingent on the satisfaction of the buyer for the survey, but also that the buyer is going to pay for the survey. And this is probably, there's a lot of areas in Douglas County and Chelan County, especially Okanagan County, where if a survey was done and it was a long time ago, the tree might be gone, the rock might be gone, the things they used back then just might not be there anymore. So it's probably a good idea to have surveys in those situations. So this agreement is contingent on the buyer's subjective satisfaction with the survey of the subject property, and this contingency is deemed automatically waived when the period expires. So there isn't any need to do any follow-up. If nothing comes up, it just goes away at the end of that time period.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So in
You wanna-
Chelan,
I want to make sure you talk loud enough.
in Chelan, if you want anything to do with the survey, what is it? Usually 45 to 60 days out?
Is that how far surveyors are out?
Right now, it's a real serious problem.
In Chelan, do you know if it's any different in Wenatchee? Or Leavenworth or?
No, that's even as far back as like last summer. There's just not enough surveyors.
There's no other, we have a shortage
Yeah,
of survey.
Kind of like, appraisers, when the refi boom settled down, they started to become more and more available. But even that, I mean, it's one of those professions that has like a 2-year apprenticeship program.
So if your buyer wants to use this form and have a survey, probably be good to get on the horn and
Find
talk to a
out.
couple surveyors and see if they can get a commitment out of them, and then make sure when you fill that form out, you put enough days in there so that can happen. So for the buyer to give notice of disapproval, that's a Form 90. And that's because it's a general notice, because there isn't a form specifically designed by Northwest MLS for this form.
Or survey?
And so what I have done, and what I'll include, oh, come on, what's going on with my little mouse? There we go. Oh, no, I need my glasses. So what I did, and I'll include this in the minutes, is that I pulled up a Form 90. And when you put that in there, and what you're doing is your reference Form 22 TS Survey Contingency Addendum to the Purchase and Sale Agreement. Item 1, Survey Contingency, line 8 and 9. Buyer gives notice to seller disapproval and demand of refund of earnest money to the buyer. And that's what you do.
This is very similar to when you're using a Form 34, you want to make sure to reference the language that you're referring to changing.
Is a standard of care for when we freelance write, call out where you're going to change and say what the change is. It's really just a 2-step process, and that's all this is right here. We're going like this is, what are we going to change? What are we giving notice on? That's what it is. This is where it is in the contract, and that's what we're changing. We're giving that notice. And in a notice, it only needs to be signed by one party. And so I
I
thought,
mean, if there are 2 buyers, only one buyer needs
No.
to.
no, if there's a buyer and a seller, only the buyer has to sign.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Right, because it's just a notice.
yeah.
It doesn't have to be mutual.
That's correct. And so I'll put that in the minutes to kind of show you what that looks like.
I believe they call that unilateral.
Mhm.
Yeah, it is unilateral.
And not buy.
And so these are, again, I'll include these. This is areas that I've highlighted, that I've brought forward and put into that matrix. So you don't have to read the contract unless you want to. 'Cause I like it's like the old cheat sheet, and you used to, one of those, you have to read a book, and you had a little book where you go 10 pages of Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
Was a big Cliff Note fan. So the buyer's obligations, where are we at now? Where's the survey? So in item 2 in the survey, buyer is responsible for, and included, ordering and scheduling of the survey, the selection of the service and scope, performance of the buyer's performance is performed at the buyer's expense. The buyer is responsible to notify the seller prior to altering anything on the property. The buyer is to restore the property and improvements to the original condition, and the buyer is responsible for all damages resulting from the survey. All of this is covered in item 2, an obligation, and there's a space for item 3 in case there's something else you want to address. Okay. So those are the things that kind of wrap up everything that we've got out of the 14 topics do something during mutual to closing that a buyer would want to inspect and verify before there. And out of that, we have the summary of that. I'm going to include in our minutes from today where we started from. We started this on day one, going through item 1, 2, 3, 4, and today we just went through 11, 12, 13, and 14. Now I was hoping to have enough time for one of the things that I'm working on that I'd like to have done by next week is I'd like to go over Form 34 or no, 35 and 35R as far as timelines and filling that form out to protect the buyer. Out of that, I'd also, come on, I'm having problems with my mouse today. I'd also like to try and finish this document off. If there's anything that's come out of working on preparing these classes, I'm having trouble getting this sucker. There we go.
There you go.
That was stressful. Is how many notice forms there are. And how many I didn't even know existed before. And so I thought as brokers that, you know, when you have a situation arise, isn't there some place we could go for quick reference and know what's available and what associated to what form? And what I'm doing is I've got a number of on the side of the form number for any notice. I put a bullet number for what the topic is, so you can kind of find the topic real fast. I put the title on the form. I then have what reference forms does it refer to? And then is there a manual for the use of that notice form? And then if I have any specific comment about it. But if you notice, this is line 3 right here for where I'm starting. But if I come down, these are the notices that I've come up with.
Oh, man. Jeez. Well, and the low appraisal.
So I'm at 46. So I have what I say through it. So there's 43 forms for notices, and then a 90 that's for anything else.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is spend some time. This is a work in progress. I've been doing research for classes. And I'm getting to the point where I think it's comprehensive enough. I can go in and fill out and double check and then have Marcia help me with the double check. And then if that's the case, I'd like to review it and then distribute that next week for everybody, because when you get into these things on whether you want to punch out or do or change, this is a real quick place to come and find out whether there's a right, you can pick the right form.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was gonna say it's not as big a deal anymore, but for the last year or so, that Form 22AN for low appraisal, I don't know how many low appraisals were just kind of verbals back and forth between the listing and the buyer agent. And it's just like they just verbally decided, okay, we're going to adjust the down payment amount. We're going to do, because a lot of those deals came with additional down payment contingencies, or they just, you know, verbally negotiated it, that there was no notice of that low appraisal back and forth. So I've
seen a lot of them.
And I think it's due to the fact that a lot of agents just don't know those notices exist.
And I think that's correct. It's if you haven't used it and been in that situation in the past, it's the first time you're addressing something, you definitely don't know whether it's there or not, unless you go hunting in the Northwest MLS world of the website.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do here is I'm into speed. I can't remember like I used to when I was younger. So if I have an organized way of storing things and I went all to work to find it the first time, I can do it very quickly the next time if I know right where to go to look for it. And so having a place where I have all of these by number, line up all the forms in my hard drive, and I collect all of this information I'm sending out in the minutes, I can go back and be refreshed very quickly on the fly if I have that arrive. And then I feel that when I talk to my client, they're getting good information from me and it's accurate. You know,
Yeah.
that's the most important thing to me, is I like to double check before I open my mouth and tell them something. Because that's, you know, you only have one bite. When you find out you told them something bad, all of a sudden trust is gone really quick with a buyer or a seller. So now, Marcia, you had one real quick one you wanted to address.
I do, the counter, if you just put up the counter offer, form 36.
Okay.
I'm going to go with this and you will.
Marcia, you want to get closer to the microphone?
That incorrect. I couldn't find it.
'Cause I love Form 18 and how simple it is.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
So, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because in the last week, I've had about 5 counter offers that were made wrong, filled out wrong. One of them was somebody new. The rest of them were all experienced. So I want to give you an analogy on how to fill this out. Now, this may be not properly, may not be proper, but when I was in the 4th grade, we used to celebrate Valentine's Day. And this is how you think about this form. Who you're gonna send it to is on line 3. And who you represent are the undersigned on line 4. And that's just as simple as it is. And it's so confusing if you get it mixed up. And there are 4 offers right now that are mutual where this
Where they're
form
switched.
is wrong. So, you know, is that going to make a difference? I don't think so. But standard of care helps us. Now we'll send this out in the minutes. But there's another thing that Russ wanted us to do for the standard of care, and I forgot about this. So we need to add it to that list. If you look on this form, whoops. Yeah, I want the form.
Okay, dear.
Thank you. Okay, if you look on the form, if I am representing, well, first of all, the first counter should be from the seller.
Yes.
And so at the very top of it, this should say, this counteroffer addendum takes precedent or supersedes any conflict or ambiguity in the original purchase and sale body. That is from the seller back to the buyers. Now, if the buyers, which is not uncommon, want to counter back, then theirs says exactly the same thing to any conflict or ambiguity in the original purchase and sale body and seller counter offer. So those are the differences. This was written up by Russ's attorney.
Brett Sullivan.
And this is what he wants on every form. And so the rest of that in the note down below underneath this form, honey, go to your notes now. Yes. So there are 3 things here that are really important. One, the counteroffer takes supersede over everything that's written. And if you just have the urge to redline something, it's not necessary. But if you do, you don't have to have people initial it. The only time I've ever had anybody really, as a buyer, or a seller, ever strongly stand up to that was the price. And
They
I
wanted to
said,
make
well,
sure.
this supersedes it. And I said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll mark through it. I'll say, see form 46 or 36. You can do that. It isn't necessary, but anything that helps to clarify it. And the fact that they did not want that price to be strewed. Now, the very last sentence in that first one is never use a form 34 as the counter offer.
Yeah, there's a question and answer in a hotline on this one here, where a broker used a form 34 instead of a 36. And what happened was, when it was received, purchase and sale agreement, all the dems were fully signed. There was mutual. So didn't have to find, if you don't sign 34,
It's still mutual.
it's mutual.
Yeah.
So you just gave away the farm. 34 does not have the protection that the form 36 has, because on 36 it also comes down and it provides this language in here. And so 34 is really dangerous if it's misused. It's really a dangerous form. But I have 3 hotline question and answers that really were interesting in addressing these. And this is something that we'll include also. But this is where somebody used a form 34. But down here it says a court could find that the PSA binding as accepted by the seller. The court just justified, easily find the sellers. What it did is it's saying, because of the way they used and interjected the form 34 and not using the 36, it's going to be settled by lawyers. There isn't going to be any easy way out of it. So that one was an interesting one to read. This one here was also kind of interesting. It was that when a buyer and seller change any terms in a contract and use a form 36 counteroffer addendum, does the striking of the initial offering need to be initialed? To see form 36 need written near the terms of striking? The answer is just no. If the price is changed, for example, on form 36, there is no requirement to modify a reference to the price on form 21. Some brokers like to make a roadmap, blah, 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 but it's not needed. So if somebody feels good about doing that and send it to you, don't have your buyer, don't have your client initial and send that, address it in 36. That's the contract. So the form, another thing that was talked about provisions in here is that it's okay if somebody does want to strike an initial instead of using a form 36. What's not okay that becomes ambiguous is when between the 2 brokers, one uses a 36 and one uses the strikeout, and they're using both methods at the same time, creates great confusion. That is not within the standard of care of a lawyer. And so that was also addressed in one of these. I thought that was good to point out.
Also, if the redlining affects the legibility.
Yeah.
It does.
Then it also falls under that standard of care.
Of making something, the greatest responsibility is making it clear and understandable.
Yeah.
And the best thing you can do to avoid that out and go against that is making a mess out of initialing and dates and putting it all over the contract and all the wording, so you can't read it.
Can you go back to your notes? Because note 3 is very important. Oh, were you done there?
I was going to read that one, but let me just find that. Where's my little note one?
Well, it should still be up there on that screen.
Okay.
Okay, so
Note
note
3.
number 3, if they have crossed it out, just tell your clients it's fine, but you're going to reference it. And then this is the formula, just down a little bit farther, where we reference the form, the name of it, the page,
Item number,
the name,
the name.
and then you change to read and what is it going to be? And then that way, that really clears it up and makes it clears up any ambiguity. Anyways, I just thought that was interesting that in the last week I had 4 or 5 of these counters. It was so confusing when it's made when it's correctly. So just remember, if you're writing a Valentine's, line 3 is who you're sending it to, and line 4 is who you represent.
Yeah.
You'll never forget that.
Awesome.
All right,
Okay.
that's all. And then next week, I would like to go over form 18 and 19 on the listing side.
Okay. So I'll have those things on notices, a quick one on 35 and 35R that I tightened up. Then Marcia's going to talk about listings.
Perfect. See
That's
everybody next week.
Any questions from anybody anywhere? Is anybody online today?
Do we have anybody?
Samantha was on there briefly, but I think she had to go.
All right.
Okay,
It was just me today.
And me.
The most important